Welcome to all of you to this first webinar in a series on climate change, climate justice, climate action, the basics for churches. This series is being offered by the Climate Justice Ministries Task Force of the California-Nevada Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. We have fondness for long names, evidently, because we do have a lot of long names as far as task forces, boards, and agencies go. Reverend Andrew Baer and I are organizing this series, and Andrew and I have both been involved in climate action for many years. We're both trained climate reality presenters, trained by Al Gore, and for quite a while have been. We've been involved in working on environmental justice, climate justice, creation care for many years. In fact, both of us actually have been environmental justice coordinators for this annual conference back in the day when we had environmental justice coordinators. I was environmental justice coordinator for several years in the 1990s. And Andrew was environmental justice coordinator for some years in the 2000s. Tonight's topic is climate change, what's at stake. I want to start this right at this very first point, just to say, what is at stake with climate change? I want to first introduce us by listening to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, what he had to say about this in his opening speech at the climate conference, COP27, in November in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. This was what he had to say. Oh, here he is, as a matter of fact, at the podium there. He said the UN Climate Conference, this UN Climate Conference, is a reminder that the answer is in our hands and the clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising, and our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. These words are hard to hear, and I'm grateful that you're here. I applaud you for being here, willing to face the reality that we are in a climate emergency. And facing what's at stake is better than being in denial. By retreating into our own personal lives. Because when we do that, when we try to escape from what's actually going on in our communities, in our society, in our world, we are creating for ourselves a moral burden. Because at some level, we realize that the stakes are high with our changing climate. And we know in some ways that we're complicit, even if we push it away and are unwilling to grapple with that fact. And that's where our faith comes in. And throughout this series, we're going to be exploring how our faith informs our responses. We can trust that God has given us and will give us everything we need to be God's people in this time. And now I want to introduce Nathan Sam Whistler, who's going to do a land acknowledgement for us and a reflection. Nathan is pastor of Yarrington Community United Methodist Church and Schurz United Methodist Church in Nevada. Nathan Sam Whistler is also chair of the Conference Committee on Native American Ministries. He also serves on the Commission on Religion and Race and on the committee, the conference committee on ethnic ministry and outreach. Thank you, Sam, for being willing to give these opening words.
Yes, and thank you for having me and for the invite. Excuse me, I'm kind of getting over a cold. Um, I was there in California last week, down Southern California, and it poured down there. My whole time there, it rained. I think they had what they call atmospheric rivers, multiple rivers that came one after another and just dropped numerous amounts of water. And, it is a blessing, a good thing that God, gives. But at the same time, some of our human systems aren't ready for these enormous amounts of moisture at once. So, we need to prepare, ourselves, but also foresee some of the different things that come of these storms. Um, as a First Nation member, a member of the Paiute, Shoshone, and Tohono Nations, I recognize our ancestral lands, not only because many of our ancestors lay beneath these grounds, but also because of the sacrifices that they have made. Um, sometimes we think in um, our I'll say colonized or civilized minds, we tend to neglect to see the importance of nature and its basic support network and how it functions within the environment that we live in. We sort of um, are here to protect what we can, even as God's people, to see that God and um, His creation is cared for in the most appropriate way. And living in today's society, we have many things that contribute to this, what they call carbon footprint, and the ways that we acquire even our basic technologies and what goes into developing them and how we dispose of them all impact the way that we live our lives today and how our descendants will live in the future. So I'm not here to preach on the climate itself. I'm also here to learn, but do acknowledge, the um, ancestors of this land, the Paiutes, the Shoshone, Western Shoshone, that is, and the many different bands that comprise these tribes. Um, More specifically, I'm of the Ogaidakutta band, known as the Trout Eaters. Um, Now, my ancestors fed off of the river and the lake that are in this region, but because of the climate change and all the different factors that contribute to the water depletion, from farming to drought to I mean, you name it. We our lake does not have life in it anymore. I mean, there's times that they'll try to transplant fish in there, but the fish will not survive because the salinity level is just so high. Um, and so some of the fish that we do have are in the river. Thankfully, up north in Pyramid Lake, they're able to harvest and keep alive the traditional fish that once lived in Walker Lake. Um, and I think having those type of supportive systems, can teach us something as well, and how we can, maintain or protect certain species to at least to a minimum. Um, and wherever you live, please feel free to share the ancestral knowledge of where you come from. Maybe you don't. Maybe you need to kind of study or ask about it, and that's okay. No pressure. But those of you that do, we like to hear the lands that you reside on. Thank you again, Sharon and Climate People. Amen.
Thank you so much, Nathan. We appreciate that very much, your reflections and acknowledgement, land acknowledgement. And we value your participation in this webinar and in this annual conference and in the denomination. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And I'm going to share the screen here. Taking off from where we were, go to the next one. And so tonight we're talking about climate change at stake. Sometimes when we look at that image of the Earth from space, it kind of looks, it's like we're in the Earth and there's space all around. So, and if we're polluting the atmosphere, it all goes out into space. We kind of think, okay, so that's a big space out there. But that's not how it is. The atmosphere is just a very thin shell over the Earth. It's and it's been called it's like a greenhouse. The sun warms the planet, and the atmosphere holds some of the heat in, some of the infrared rays in, reflects some of it out to space, not too much, just the right amount. And so our planet Earth has been called a Goldilocks planet because it's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. But as we have been polluting with pouring pollution, especially from our industrial systems into the atmosphere, that includes carbon dioxide is the largest and longest lasting pollutant, greenhouse gas pollutant. There's also methane, and that's even more, even a stronger impact, much stronger impact of greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide, but it doesn't last as long in the atmosphere. And then there's nitrous oxide and other pollutants as well, all going into that thin shell of the atmosphere. If you look at this image again, that thin shell, if you start at the Earth, at the surface of the Earth, and if you could drive at just a regular speed up to the top of that line of the atmosphere, it would take about 5 to 10 minutes. So it's way thinner than it seems. And so we are really packing this atmosphere with additional greenhouse gases. So for 800,000 years, and this is longer than much longer than than Homo sapiens, at least, have even been around. The carbon dioxide concentration, we're just going to focus on carbon dioxide because it's the largest pollutant, has been under 300 parts per million. And for most of that time, under 280 parts per million. And reflected that same pattern, so that when there's been more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, never more than 300 parts per million. But when there's more, the temperature is hotter. When there's less, the temperature is colder. So it's been going on like this for longer than our species has been around. But now we are at over 400 parts per million. And that was in 2013, over 400 parts per million. And if we keep going on at the same trajectory of releasing these toxins into the environment, by in 40 years, it will be at 600 parts per million. So this is not a good thing. And temperatures correspond. As CO2 increases, so does the temperature. So this is the past 2,000 years. So that's the famous hockey stick, the CO2 concentration, that Michael Mann, scientist who came up with that term, the hockey stick. And then temperatures follow, getting warmer and warmer. 20 of the 21 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2002. And the hottest of all have been the last 8 years. And this is just a speeded up version of the temperatures from 1880 to 2016 of how that looks. And this is from NASA. It only shows to about 1 degree Celsius more, but that's getting close to 2 degrees Celsius. Now we're about at 2 degrees, Fahrenheit. Now we're about at 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And the Earth has a fever. The Earth has a fever. It would impact us if we had a fever of that high. That much over, let me explain. It's about 1 degree Celsius above what it was in pre-industrial times. So that's almost 2 degrees above what it was in pre-industrial times, that kind of steady state that we saw, that when it got hotter and colder and there were ice ages and warming periods, but it was always pretty stable compared to now. So this is the departure from the 1881 to 1910 average. This is how much the global average temperatures have changed. So it's gone way up. And as you can see, sometimes it's above 1.2 degrees Celsius. That was 2021. So it's getting hotter. And it's about 1.15, I believe. Andrew, I think we talked about this. I can't remember quite, but you can pitch in here if you have the figures clearly in your mind.
It's 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial average.
Thank you. So so this is accurate for now, and as well. So that's going up, and that is dangerous, needless to say. As temperatures increase, the oceans evaporate more moisture into the sky. And then something has to happen to all that water that's gotten evaporated into the sky. And so there are global record-breaking precipitation anomalies. And that's what we're experiencing with our atmospheric rivers and, record-breaking precipitation events. And of course, we get floods. But the thing that not everyone realizes, because it isn't covered in the news, is that this is happening all over the world. And because I was trained as a climate reality presenter, one of the best things about that is I have the slides every time that they give a new training. I have all the slides. So I have hundreds of slides of disasters from all over the world. And I'm not going to show them to you today. And I don't usually show them because I show some, but not. You get the picture. It's happening all over the world. The same extra heat that evaporates more water from the ocean, causing bigger downpours and floods, pulls moisture even more quickly from the soil, causing longer and deeper droughts. Sound familiar? There it is. And that too is happening all over the world. And as with so many other weather-related disasters, it impacts those who are marginalized, those who are in the most vulnerable nations and regions. It impacts them most. There are many, that's for us, that's us, but there are many, many people who are having, the crops are just not growing. And this is true on the African continent. This is true in regions in Asia. And many times it's women and their dependent children, because often women are the subsistence farmers in their communities, and they are often suffering the most. And of course, this leads to people leaving their countries. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. I mean, not tomorrow, at our next webinar, where we're going to be talking about climate justice. Who does it impact the most? Okay, so this is what happens when it gets hot. Besides drought, is the places are more prone to fires. The fires are longer lasting, more intense, and fire season is longer, and it burns more area. And that's been happening again all over the world, in many places in the world, because climate is impacting different regions differently. But 6 of the 7 largest fires in California's history have occurred since August 2020. That's a lot. And I'm sure many of you remember those fires. Something people don't always realize is that 93% of the extra heat from the global warming pollution goes into the ocean. And of course, when ocean waters rise, cyclones, hurricanes, great storms are more likely. This is just one. This is one that was on India's west coast in 2021. There are many, many other hurricanes, and you hear about them, but we don't always hear about what that means in relation to the warming climate. Glaciers are melting because of the warming ocean. And this is the change in the global ocean heat content just since 1960. It's gotten very much hotter, including at some of the deeper levels of the ocean. And this is a startling fact. Half of this increase has occurred in less than 20 years. This is not slowing down. And so, of course, if you have melting glaciers and other sea ice, you have rising sea levels. Boy, I don't know if some of you saw the pictures of Santa Cruz recently. I used to live in Santa Cruz, and we're going there next, I think, Monday. But just wiping out some of our favorite walking spots up above the beach. And again, people who are impacted the most are in the most vulnerable regions. And at the very last minute for this slideshow, I wanted to pull up the Philippines that have suffered so much, the low-lying areas. It's not just the island nations, and we'll be talking about that again in 2 weeks, the most vulnerable regions. Here's a statement from the National Council of Churches, because I think it's important for us to realize what that means for us as a church and as local churches. The impacts of global climate change threaten all creation and will make it more difficult for people of faith to care for those in need. With expected increases in drought, storm intensity, disease, species extinction, and flooding, doesn't say fires, but The impacts of global climate change will increase the lack of food, shelter, and water available, particularly to those living in or near poverty. Though many understand the devastating impacts that climate change will have on human communities around the world, few understand the impacts that climate change will have on church ministries, such as refugee resettlement, feeding the hungry, and disaster relief. The impacts of global climate change are already calling on the church to provide more financial resources and volunteer services to meet the growing needs of people in poverty in the US and around the world. So it is impacting our churches already, and it's going to impact our churches and our ministries and the places where we do ministry and mission more and more. So again, here we are with the temperature already at 1.2 degrees Celsius. Now, the scientists of the world, and I know that Andrew's going to be talking more about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but they have put together statements about how we are not supposed to, but limiting global warming to 1.3 degrees Celsius is a way to prevent the worst of the climate impacts, the worst of climate impacts. It's a way to, it's a starting point. You know, sometimes we hear people say that it's too late, we might as well not do anything. That is not what the scientists are saying. That is not what our prophets are saying. They are saying it is well past time. We really need to get going on this. We need to work on this. We need to face this and make radical changes that are proportionate to what is required to meet this challenge. That it's a political issue, not a scientific issue, to slow and change the trajectory that we're on, and that every degree of prevention and every degree of acceleration makes a huge difference to our future, to us now, but also to future generations. So let me see, I don't know if I was quite done. Let me go right one more. I'm not sure if I have one more slide or not. It's almost Andrew's turn. Oh, so to keep to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to listen to the climate justice activists who say system change, not climate change, because CO2 emissions would have to decline by 45% before 2030. I'm not going to go any further. I'm just going to talk about that because that's just 7 years away. So that's what we are aiming toward. And we have plenty of people who are also aiming for the same thing. And especially many of the climate justice leadership is coming from our young people and the children. So the least we can do is step up and stand with them. And that's part of intergenerational justice. And so with that, we will be talking just about a couple of things that we can do tonight, but then in session 3 of this, we'll be focusing completely on things that we can do in about climate change and climate justice. And so now I want to turn it over to Andrew, and Andrew, take it away.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Andrew Bear. And tonight I'm going to, or today or whenever you're watching this, I'm going to talk about a few different organizations, first of all, that we hear a lot in the discussions about climate change, and that's IPCC and COPs. And I'm not going to assume that folks have a solid understanding of these names. I didn't before I started looking into it. I certainly heard the names IPCC, and I knew it was some organization, but I didn't know much about it. So I just want to go over some basics and with the hope that this is helpful. So I'm going to start with talking about the IPCC, and IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as Sharon said. And the IPCC is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations, which is responsible for advancing knowledge about human-induced climate change. The IPCC provides the world's most authoritative scientific assessments on climate change. And I recently learned it was actually started not just by the United Nations, but also by the World Meteorological Organization in 1988. And so its main mission is to evaluate the science of climate change, coordinate research findings, and promoting a wider understanding of the status of climate change, especially geared towards governments at all levels of government, to inform the development of policy so that we can avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change. Okay, can we have the next slide? And if not, that's okay. It's the one that has the IPCC report, the physical science basis. And if we can get that up, that's okay. It's the next one, Sharon. The slide itself is not that crucial. So over the last 3 decades, since its inception in 1988, the IPCC has engaged in 6 different assessment cycles, and these take quite a bit of time. That's why they happen only every 6-7 years. The IPCC just completed the 6th assessment cycle and issued its reports in the fall of 2021 and in the spring of 2022. Each assessment cycle brings together scientists from around the world in many different disciplines. The most recent cycle, and I found this really amazing, the most recent cycle involved 721 scientists from 90 countries that were divided into 3 working groups. In each assessment round, the IPCC identifies where the scientific community agrees, where there's differences of opinion, and where further research is needed. The IPCC's reports go through an extensive peer review process. Each assessment round will contain several reports, and these reports receive usually between 50,000 and 75,000 comments for revisions, which is quite a huge amount of work. And all these suggested revisions are brought together and put into the writing of the final reports. And the final report, line by line, everyone has to agree. So it's a consensus-based document. I think it's helpful to keep in mind that although the IPCC is the most authoritative scientific body there is regarding our knowledge of climate change, that the reports have all tended to fall on the conservative side for a variety of reasons. In other words, the IPCC predictions tend to underestimate future warming and impacts. So, for example, we're seeing ice melting at rates that are much faster than prior IPCC projections. One of the reasons for the conservative projections is that, again, it's a consensus project. So if not everyone agrees on things, it doesn't get put into the report. And there's questions about tipping points and what are the thresholds of tipping points and a variety of other issues. And when there's not agreement on that, it doesn't go into the report. Another reason for the conservative nature of the predictions is political. Each of the 90 countries has to sign off on the final reports. And in the past, countries such as the United States and Saudi Arabia have had sections removed that highlight the importance of phasing out fossil fuels, and instead have put in their place the promotion of technological fixes. So those are a couple examples of why the IPCC reports have tended to be more on the conservative side. So the IPCC reports are taken and they inform governmental decision-making bodies and policy bodies, but they're also taken and inform the work of the COPs, which not police, but Conference of the Parties. So the Conference of the Parties meets every year and brings together the 197 nations and territories that are called parties that have signed on to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And I know this is a lot of technological language here, but almost all the nations of the world have signed onto the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so every year, each of these nations and territories sends representatives to meet, and they've met annually since 1995. So the first conference of the party was called COP1. So COP21 was the 21st meeting of the COP, which was held in Paris, France in 2015. And I'm going to come back to that because that was a really important meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The goal of each COP is to establish goals for mitigating climate change, to negotiate agreements, and to evaluate whether or not the previous targets are being met, and to encourage global cooperation for climate action. The last COP, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, last year, unfortunately had 636 lobbyists from the oil and gas industries that were registered to attend, which is a higher number than the delegations from any other country except the United Arab Emirates. This year, in the fall, will be COP28, which will be held in the United Arab Emirates. And we just learned recently that the person that was nominated to be the president of this COP, or who will preside over it, is Sultan Al-Jaber, who is the CEO of Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. So we have the president of a national oil company who's going to preside over a climate conference. As head of the oil company, he sought to increase the output of crude oil from 3 million barrels a day to 5 million barrels a day by 2030. So within this same time frame that we're needing to reduce our emissions by 45%, as Sharon said, we have the person presiding over it representing an oil company that plans to increase the development of fossil fuel extraction and processing. So, we continue to hope that something good will come out of these meetings, but I think there's valid concern that these global meetings are being increasingly co-opted by the fossil fuel industries. So I mentioned COP21 held in Paris a little earlier, and that was held in 2015. And this is the body that agreed to limit the amount of warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial level. And for those of us who don't speak Celsius, that's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. And this agreement to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees is known as the Paris Accord. And Sharon, if you could forward one more slide. So as we mentioned, We are currently at a median warming of 1.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And I think it's also good to keep in mind that the Earth does not warm in a uniform way, and that 40% of the planet has already warmed more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. So 1.5 degrees Celsius might not seem like a big temperature difference. And again, we're not talking about temperature, we're talking global average temperatures. We're talking climate, not the kind of temperature fluctuations that we'd see within a normal day. The average global temperatures include all temperatures, including summer and winter, northern and southern hemispheres, land and ocean. And to give an example of the difference between ice ages and warm periods is as little as 4 degrees Celsius. So think, just imagining what it was like at the last ice age until the pre-industrial times, that was a 4 degrees Celsius change. And so a small change in climate can have a very large effect on life on our planet. So the question is, why did the Paris Accord decide to limit the average global temperatures to 1.5? 1.5 degrees of warming, of course, is not an absolute line in the sand, but it's a general indicator of where many climate impacts are predicted to go from destructive to catastrophic. Consider that we're already at 1.2 degrees of warming, and that at this level, the Earth is already experiencing pronounced effects of climate change. And I'm sure you're all aware of these. There's an increase in drought, wildfires, floods, sea level rise, extreme rain events, stronger and more frequent hurricanes and destructive storms, extreme heat events, ocean acidification, melting glaciers, melting ice caps, famine, water scarcity, infectious diseases, human migrations, people seeking refuge, and more. It was really shocking this last year when the glaciers were melting. 1/3 of the country of Pakistan was underwater. And imagine that, 1/3 of a whole country underwater. And also consider that the Amazon rainforest, which used to absorb a lot more CO2 than it emitted and was really helping us sequester carbon, is now releasing more CO2 than it absorbs, adding more greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. A recent report by the World Meteorological Association finds that there's a 50-50 chance that the average global temperature will reach 1.5 degrees within the next 5 years, and that this likelihood is increasing with time. Okay, next slide. Perhaps one of the most important reasons to keep warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial times is that this is where scientists predict that there will be enough heating to push many of the natural systems past dangerous tipping points. When we talk about tipping points, we're talking about a situation where a small change can cause a larger, more critical change to be initiated, taking the climate from one state to another, like from an ice age to a warming period. It can have a significant effect. This change can be abrupt and irreversible on timeframes relevant to humans. Even at our current level of warming, which is 1.2 degrees, there's evidence that some tipping points have already been activated, such as melting and disintegration of the West Antarctic glacial system and Arctic ice loss, and the melting of permafrost. And again, what makes these such a big risk is that once these tipping points have crossed, there may be a cascading effect where one tipping point activates another tipping point, and we have a domino effect of cascading tipping points that could push our planetary climate systems into what scientists call hothouse Earth. And tipping points are serious because once a planetary system has been tipped, even if we suddenly reduced fossil fuel emissions, that will not lead us back to the previous climate state. So it becomes a situation where no matter what we do, the new state of the climate is kind of baked in as far as human timeframes. So since our present level of warming at 1.2 degrees is showing evidence of already activating tipping points, there's a chance that 1.5 degrees of warming is actually not safe at all. And it's a real risk to assume that it is safe. So I think it's a mistake to think that somehow 1.5 degrees Celsius is safe, since our current level of warming is not really safe. So there's a lot of urgency in addressing our fossil fuel emissions. Okay, one more slide, Sharon. When the IPCC released their 6th assessment reports in the fall of 21 and the spring of 2022, the report said this: climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. Scientists are observing changes in the Earth's climate in every region and across the whole climate system. The Secretary General of the United Nations calls this, the most recent report, a code red for humanity, and says the alarm bells are deafening and the evidence is irrefutable. Greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel burning and deforestation are choking our planet and putting billions of people at immediate risk. Global heating is affecting every region on Earth, with many of the changes becoming irreversible. So there's a short window for taking action of only a few years. I think it's sobering to realize that with this small window of taking action that Sharon mentioned, of reducing our fossil fuel emissions by 45% by 2030, that this last group of reports will be the only reports that are released during this window of time when we have time to take action to avoid the worst effects of climate change. There is a growing concern that we now have a very low probability of keeping warming under 1.5 degrees. I mean, you'd think that if we really understood that we have 7 years to reduce our fossil fuel emissions by 45%, that we'd be seeing fairly dramatic action. And at this point, we're not seeing it. So there's an increasing likelihood that 1.5 degrees Celsius goal will be crossed at some point, possibly as early as 2030. And in order to keep emissions below 1.5, we really need to take action now. And as Sharon mentioned, even if we do cross 1.5 degrees of warming, that doesn't mean that we give up and stop feeling the urgency in taking action, because every 1/10 of a degree matters for future generations of humans and the web of life. Hans Otto Portner, who is one of the co-chairs of the IPCC, said this, The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. And so, the title of this webinar, this first webinar, is What's at Stake? And the science is very clear that what's at stake is having a habitable planet. And so the stakes are very high indeed. And, that's why we're holding this webinar. And, as a church together, we have agency, we can take action. And I think that the earth and this creation is certainly worth protecting. So thank you for caring. Thank you for your love of the earth. And thank you for tuning into this webinar. So do we have time for some Q&A, Sharon?
I'm not sure. We might want to do our suggestions for action first, and then go back, and maybe people will have questions about that as well. Considering, what do we do? That's kind of that puts people in a conundrum in a way, because what do we do, Andrew, if things are this far progressed with climate catastrophe? I'll let you start. I think you were going to maybe give some suggestions for resources people can look at.
Sure. And really good point, Sharon, that just knowing how bad things are without knowing how to help kind of can lead to a sense of despair and helplessness. And we're not helpless. And together we can work for solutions. And this first webinar, since we're doing some kind of background on the science and the global scientific bodies that are doing the research and decision-making bodies informing policy, et cetera, I have a few sources for just keeping up to date on the current information and to learning about climate change. There's certainly environmental organizations to plug into, such as 350.org, such as Extinction Rebellion. I've been watching what folks are doing in the UK with Just Stop Oil and Insulate Britain, and direct action is certainly one. Advocacy with our elected officials is another, but we can go into more details about those in future webinars. But at least I want to share a few, I've got 3 sources of information that I recommend. The first is go to the IPCC's website, and their website is ipcc.ch. And there you'll be able to look at all of the reports of the various assessment cycles. And some of the reports are really large and only for if you totally want to geek out on climate science, and some are more of summaries for policymakers. And those are where I would recommend you start, is looking at the most recent one for the 6th assessment cycle and the report for policymakers. Another organization is Carbon Brief. And Carbon Brief has articles by climate scientists and posted all the time with a lot of up-to-date information. And they're a great source, and you can peruse their documents that they've got archived and find a lot of information about climate change and the most current information. And that's carbonbrief.org. And then the other source, this is a news organization or a news climate news service that I find really helpful, that have a lot of stories on climate change, and that's Inside Climate News. And again, just insideclimatenews.org. And lastly, I want to encourage everyone to check out a documentary done by Frontline, which I found was quite eye-opening and really crucial to understanding. I mean, you think about it, we've known about, Exxon and the oil companies have known about climate change since the 1970s, at least, and certainly by the 1980s. And with the elections and whichever party's been in power, we might be asking, we've known about this since the late 80s, that this is Al Gore really brought this to attention in 1988. And the question is, why haven't we been able to take political action? Why haven't our leaders taken action to get us on the right track to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change? And this documentary series really lays it out pretty clearly. And that's, again, it's called The Power of Big Oil. So if you just Googled, Frontline, The Power of Big Oil, I'm sure you'll find it. It's a 3-part series, and I recommend starting with part 1. It's got a lot of really good background that shows how we've gotten ourselves into this situation. How about you, Sharon?
Okay, I put 3 of the things you mentioned. I followed along and I put them in the chat, but I didn't get that. I think I did miss one. I think it was the second one you mentioned, because I started typing.
And I can put that. I've got Carbon
Okay.
Brief. I'll put the 3 I've got here. It's
Okay. You put those in there.
ipcc.ch.
Yeah. If they get them twice, that's good too. That's even better. And I put a few things in the chat. You can find action opportunities that we're participating in or promoting through our Climate Justice Ministries Task Force. If you go to the California Nevada Annual Conference website, because we are putting out a report each month, and you can just Google climate justice on the conference webpage, and you'll get all of our reports, including the January report. So you'll be able to find out some of the things we're doing. And I'm just going to mention a couple of things. We need support if we're going to face all this. We need support from each other. We need prayer, and we need encouragement. We need community, a community of people who actually understand, if not completely what's at stake, but understand that this is really a serious issue. And really, as a church, as the Church of Jesus Christ, we are called to face what is going on and to work in the direction of the world as God intends for it to be, as Jesus did with his passion for what he called the kingdom of God. So I really encourage you to connect with us. And we, the task force, we are also connected with a larger movement, the creation justice movement of the United Methodist Church. It's other annual conferences and representatives of boards and agencies that are working on this issue and other issues of creation care and creation justice. So I hope you'll stay connected with us, and you can put your email in the chat if you like, or contact us at climatejustice@cnumc.org. That's Cal Nevada United Methodist Church.org. So cnumc.org. So one other way you can connect with people is to form a small group, a green team. It can be in your church, or pull together a few people if you have a social concerns committee, social justice committee. Pull together one other person, maybe start a small group study, or bring somebody into looking at watching the webinars. This one's going to be recorded and available. and maybe watching the series and having a conversation about it. So then you've got someone that you can pray with and learn and grow and work with together. And I'll just say, Andrew said something about civil disobedience. I have known Andrew for a long time, but I ran into him at a nonviolent direct action against the banks in San Francisco and in front of one of the banks. And I was in front of another bank with a group. And I just, we are getting ready to do, not Andrew and I, but I am actually organizing with, helping to organize a bank action with a group called Third Act Faith for older adults with Bill McKibben's group. He started that. And it's Third Act, but it's the Third Act Faith group. And we are going to be looking at banks that fund the big oil companies, the top 4 banks that fund the big oil companies. And the World Council of Churches is also engaging banks. So you can read a little bit more about it in the conference report that we submit, and I'll be putting more out about that later on. So there's plenty to do, and we can spend time in the natural world and be refreshed and renewed and remember the grace that's been given to us, and we can be refreshed in that way. And so I hope that that you will find the strength that you need and the help that you need to face all this, and we're coming into Lent, and that's a time when we remember the suffering of Jesus, and we can remember the suffering of the earth and the suffering of our people as well, and find solace in that way. And I don't know, shall we take another 5 minutes, Andrew, and see if people have comments, questions, something that people might want to say before we ask Rosie to give the prayer? Give 5 minutes, maybe 10.
Sure.
Okay. Does anybody have a brief comment that they'd like to share, or a question they'd like to contribute? Comment?
Yeah, I want to say comments are definitely welcome. We both recognize that this is a lot of information to put out there, and it might be affecting us. It's undoubtedly affecting us in a variety of ways. And so, yeah, share how you're receiving this, share comments, ask questions.
And we are, I at least am available after we close with the prayer to stay online and to have an informal conversation. I don't know if I didn't talk about that with you, Andrew. What do you think? Yeah, okay. So people might appreciate it if we actually close on time.
Yeah.
And then we stay and visit.
Sharon, Rosie's got her hand raised.
Oh, Rosie, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Joan. I'm glad you're co-host.
It was like, if she didn't notice my hand, I'm going to speak out. Anyways, I just want to say thank you so much for putting this together. There was a lot of information, very good information. And I'm looking at, my goodness, this is the first time I'm hearing a lot of this. How many out there are, not even aware of it? So I think as a start, this is great. A lot of information. And how do we disperse this? Disperse this so that it's not overwhelming, but it's something that's constructive in how individuals can take it. And like you said about small groups, right? Hey, you can do a family group. You can do a little, like a church group or what have you. So I think the opportunities are there, and I'd like to, pursue the next few sessions and just get a better understanding and get excited. I think it's all about being intentional. I like to use the word intentional. If we are not intentional about anything, we can all be like, oh, nice presentation, and thank you, close the chapter, go on to the next thing in life. So and I think this is something that affects everybody, and if we are not educating, who else will? So I just want to say good work in putting this together, and very knowledge, full of knowledge, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, maybe we should end in prayer and then we'll give some time, Sharon.
That's great. Thank you, Rosie. And I just want to mention that Rosie is a longtime leader in the Conference United Women in Faith group, formerly United Methodist Women. And she's now the nominations chair in which district, Rosie?
Oh, Central Valley District.
Central Valley District. And I got to know Rosie when we worked together in 2015 and 2016 on the climate justice study for Mission U. We had some really good events there. And so thank you, Rosie, for taking us out in prayer. This will be our close.
Thank you. And let us feel the presence of the creation that surround us, that wake us up in the morning and put us to sleep each day. The clock is ticking, as we heard. The answer is in our hands, and the stakes are high. God of creation and God of grace, the earth has a fever. Help us to equip ourselves with the right resources. Give us the motivation and the urgency to educate our community so that we all become responsible in helping to heal our earth that is sick and will get sicker if we don't do anything about it. Help us to expand our circles of friends and share information that is crucial in our attempt to take action to save the world. Let us support each other in spreading the knowledge that we acquire as part of this task force. We need your help and your guidance in this work, dear Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.